Eddie is walking down the streets with his father Doc, catching up on what he's been up to at work. But Doc isn't interested in that kind of information. He wants a candid update on Eddie's sex life, which is sadly close to non-existent. All he's been doing is dating a little bit, which Doc finds extremely confusing. Eddie refuses to get married, and still doesn't enjoy the freedom of a bachelor's life. Eddie argues that his perceived refusal to get married is just waiting for the right person. Doc honestly feels bad for his son, and doesn't want him to be alone on Valentine's Day. Eddie clarifies that he'll be at a wedding. Doc's happiness evaporates when he finds out that it's Jody, Eddie's ex-fiance's wedding. Eddie is adamant that they're friends who have moved past their relationship. He even expects the wedding to be cathartic, and an opportunity to get closure. Doc still isn't very convinced, and offers to take him to Las Vegas for Valentine's Day for a rowdy boys trip. Eddie turns down this inappropriate proposition very politely. Eddie meets his friend Mac at the bar, who drinks a girly cosmopolitan despite being a grown man. They observe how beautiful Jody looks as a bride, and Mac senses some remorse in Eddie's eyes. He points out that Eddie had 5 years to seal the deal with her. Yet he ended things due to several reasons he can't remember now. Mac mimics all the complaints Eddie used to have about Jody to jog his friend's memory. He emphasizes how it's high time for Eddie to get married, because he's 40 and has never been married before. Mac believes that Eddie just needs to dive into it like he did, even though he's terrified yet happy in his marriage. Mac's wife, Tammy, briefly joins them before taking her husband away to mingle with the guests. Left alone, Eddie looks for his table and realizes that he's been seated at the kids' table. He stops a man passing by, under the impression that he's the organizer. However, he has gotten a hold of the wrong flamboyant man, and the real wedding coordinator approaches him. He voices his concerns to the organizer, but gets the response that his table is the singles table. He awkwardly sits among the kids to eat his food. One of the little girls at the table assumes that his wife couldn't make it to the wedding today. Eddie faces even more embarrassment when he reveals that he doesn't even have a serious girlfriend, let alone a wife or an ex-wife. The teenage boys make bets about his sexuality because they perceive him to be gay or bi. He plays along with the girls' guess that he's a widower. The kids catch him with a silly game, and all believe firmly that he's gay. Eddie listens to the groom's speech about how wonderful Jody is, and claps in optimism. However, he feels like a total loser when Jody disses all her exes in her wedding speech, and even Mac publicly makes fun of him for the dig. Jody and her father indirectly humiliate Eddie, who remains calm and composed even though he's cringing inside. Eddie passes by a woman sitting alone in a restaurant and smiles at her from afar. She reciprocates his flirtatious gestures, but this doesn't last long. Eddie's hopes are taken away by that woman's boyfriend, who joins her at the table, holds her hand, and shoots a glare at Eddie. But fate has other plans for our dreamy bachelor, as he spots a woman getting robbed from across the street. Eddie catches the robber and tries to get the purse back. But the robber is clever and pepper sprays him, running away with the bag. The victim of the robbery, Lila, gets to Eddie and checks up on him because he's wincing in pain. His reaction subsides when she mentions that he actually sprayed him with her perfume. Eddie takes her scent in, while she screams in frustration because she lost everything. Eddie apologizes to her for failing to catch the culprit. She thanks him in return for getting involved. Eddie knows that he has to find someone now, and Lila looks quite innocent and alluring to him. So he helps her out with her laundry and awkwardly puts her lingerie in the basket too. They make some more conversation. It's time for her to leave, as her bus has arrived, so he loans her a $5 bill for fare. As Lila goes away on the bus, they both shout out their names to the other person. Eddie feels regretful for not doing more. But their story isn't over, because he finds that she accidentally left behind her panties on the street. Those panties have an image of David Bowie embroidered on them, which Doc finds commendable when Eddie shows it to him. Doc and Mac both believe that this girl is the perfect match for Eddie, because she is friendly, hot, alone on Valentine's Day, and has Eddie's favorite musician pasted on her undies. However, Eddie didn't get her number, because he didn't want to hit on a woman who just got mugged. Plus, he's quite sure that she already has an awesome boyfriend, judging by how gorgeous she is. Doc and Mac aren't very convinced, and insist that Eddie chickened out. Mac takes his leave, because he has to buy tampons for Tammy, who just got her period. Doc also leaves for his root canal appointment, after reminding Eddie that he made a huge mistake by letting this girl go. Eddie is at work, guiding a kid to not swing in baseball, because a walk is as good as a hit. Doc doesn't agree with this safe approach, and encourages the kid to swing at the next ball. The kid follows Doc's instructions and makes a hit. This teaches Eddie that playing it safe does not always work out. Coincidentally, he sees Lila browsing through some clothing in his store. He shares this with Doc, who pulls out her Bowie panties he has been carrying around with him. They start fighting over the panties when Lila walks over to them. She explains that she was in the neighborhood looking for a fleece, and asks for Eddie's input on the 2 pieces she has picked out. Eddie introduces her to Doc, who immediately blows his son's cover and admits that they've been talking about her and her panties for a week. Eddie is humiliated and returns the Bowie panties back to Lila with a futile attempt to salvage his dignity. Doc walks away from them, satisfied that his work here is done now. She repeats her original request for help with the fleece, and he guides her professionally. Since he has nothing to lose now, he casually asks if she likes pie. She doesn't understand what he's talking about for a moment, and agrees when he clarifies himself. On their pie date, Eddie is really surprised to discover that someone who looks like her is an environmental researcher. She also comes clean to him about the fact that she didn't really need the fleece she bought today. In fact, she came into his store today to see him. And all these positive signs from her brighten up Eddie's eyes. They go on to have many successful, fun-filled, and PDA-packed dates, but she hasn't slept with him yet. Eddie is fine with it and does not expect any explanations from her. Yet, she clarifies that she doesn't want to sleep with him too soon and risk the wonderful relationship they have right now. One day, Eddie gets a call from Lila at work. They meet up, and she breaks the news to him that she might have to live in Rotterdam for at least 2 years due to work. Eddie is crushed and thinks of ways Lila can say no to her boss, but she doesn't want to risk her career. Lila explains that her company wants her to move because the other researcher is married. It is against her company's policy to move married people, which gives Eddie an idea. But before discussing it with Lila, he seeks Mac and Doc's counsel on this matter. They don't see a problem with him marrying Lila, but he's worried about the fact that they've only been together for 6 weeks. Eddie also points out that she's not really funny. Doc responds that it's a man's job to be funny, and girls aren't really wired to have a great sense of humor. Doc and Mac's blabbering convince him that Lila is wonderful, but he still can't overlook the permanence of marriage. Marrying Lila will mean a long-term commitment with one woman, trading off the rest of them. Mac is offended by Eddie finding faults in Lila, and points out that the rest of the women don't want him anyway. The motivation from his dad and best friend drives him to finally marry Lila. Eddie feels great on his wedding day, and is excited for his honeymoon. He has the next 3 weeks off, which he'll spend road tripping down to Cabo with Lila. Mac wants him to do a favor for him, by asking for Uncle Tito at the hotel in Cabo. Mac gives Eddie a package to hand over to Uncle Tito, who helps him out from time to time, and might even give Eddie a big discount. Lila brings over her mom to Mac and Eddie, and they get worried when they see how huge she is. Their notion about women aging like their mothers is a negative indicator for Eddie's future now, as Lila won't be so pretty with the passage of time. Lila and Eddie set out on their honeymoon and sing along to David Bowie's songs on the road. Eddie brings up that he wants to catch a marlin fish to hang up at his store on this trip. But Lila can't join him, because she gets really seasick on boats. Eddie understands, and doesn't let it ruin his mood because there are still a lot of things they can do. They can rent a burro, or go on an adventure in the mountains. But none of this appeals much to Lila. She prefers just relaxing on the beach, and it's a third world country anyway, so it could be dangerous. Basically, Cabo screams adventure for Eddie, but danger for Lila. On top of that, Eddie gets annoyed by her relentless singing, so he turns the radio off. Lila suggests finding a room to have sex, so he takes a sharp turn to get laid. Things take a turn for the worse, because they're not sexually compatible. She likes really wild positions that he hasn't even heard of. They go out for breakfast the next morning, and Eddie is quiet, because he doesn't like to talk much in the mornings. Lila, on the other hand, wants him to hold her hand while they eat, which makes it difficult for him to have his breakfast. She's also bad at math, talks about private details in public places, and has a deviated septum that causes liquids to come out of her nose when she drinks them. When they get to the beautiful resort they're supposed to stay at, they both admit that they've been nervous. It's both of their first times being in a marriage, which is why things have been off, so they decide to hit the reset button. A mariachi band greets them, and Eddie pays them to keep serenading Lila while she gets snacks from happy hour. Eddie is going to check them, and when he runs into the teenage boys from the wedding, they make fun of him, as they're there on vacation with their parents. Eddie goes to the counter and asks for Uncle Tito, on behalf of his friend. The receptionist is Uncle Tito, and opens the present Mac sent for him. It's a porn tape, but some guests catch Tito holding it, so he acts as if Eddie ordered it. Eddie plays along so that Tito can keep his job. Lila is really enjoying the cocktails, and Tito warns Eddie to keep their rings in the safe, because they don't want to lose them at the beach. Eddie checks out how expensive the honeymoon suite might be, but feels relief now that they're a two-income family. This is when he stumbles upon Lila's true job, which is her volunteering for an environmental group, so she overstated her job and has no earnings of her own. They get into an argument, and she brings up her ex-boyfriend. This baffles Eddie even more, because the guy who stole Lila's purse was actually her ex-boyfriend, who was trying to get back his wallet and keys from her. Their fight worsens, and Lila storms out of the room. Later, Eddie searches for her all around the resort when he stumbles into a woman. She seeks his help to pick up the camera she dropped. When she comes down to get it from him, Eddie recognizes her from the reception desk that morning. He tries to justify that it wasn't him who rented the obscene tape, but she doesn't care much. The woman, Miranda, is called back to her room by her lousy cousin as they're playing a family game. She's in Cabo for a family reunion, where her aunt and uncle renew their wedding vows every year. Eddie returns to his room where he finds an apologetic Lila waiting for him. He makes up with her, as she accepts that she needs to get paid if she wants to get out of debt. Eddie realizes that she owes $26,000 in debt, possibly due to the cocaine addiction she used to have that caused her deviated septum. Lila falls asleep peacefully that night, after completely sexually traumatizing Eddie. They're at the beach the next day when they get into a disagreement. Lila wants to apply mineral oil to her body, but he really recommends she use some sunscreen, because the sun is different here. Eddie's gaze shifts to Miranda, who is playing with some kids on the beach wearing a onesie. The teenage boys pass by Eddie and Lila, who are sunbathing, and finally believe his story. The mariachi band scares Eddie and Lila by creeping up on them, and keeps playing unrequitedly. As expected, Lila gets horribly sunburned, and cusses at Eddie when he tries to apply aloe to her skin. Eddie calls Doc in private to get help, but he dismisses his concerns, under the impression that Eddie's not living up to the honeymoon standards. So Eddie goes to the bar to drown his sorrow in booze. He's almost done when he meets Miranda again and formally introduces himself. They chat for a bit when an old lady asks if they're here on their honeymoon. Eddie says yes, but before he can elaborate, Miranda plays along with it and introduces him to her family. Tito sees this and silently disapproves of it. Eddie doesn't get a chance to tell Miranda that he's married, even though he wants to. He sits down with Miranda and her family, and instantly becomes their favorite. The old lady sends a round of shots their way, and Miranda and Eddie drink them all through the night. Miranda is a lacrosse coach and comes from a decent family who loves Eddie's sense of humor. Eddie and Miranda later get high together on the beach. He expresses how much he loves her family, except Martin, who seems like a douchebag. Miranda explains that it's because Miranda is dating Martin's best friend Cal. But they decided to take a break because Cal backed out of the commitment of marrying her. So her relationship is almost over, and she asks Eddie about his status. But before he can answer, Martin interrupts them and takes Miranda away. Eddie sneaks back into his room late at night, but gets interrogated by Lila about where he was. He makes excuses that Lila accepts. She goes on about how she's miserable because of the sunburn. She tried to take a Tylenol for the pain, but the Mexican pills were so big that they kept getting stuck in her throat, and then her deviated septum. Eddie pulls the gigantic pill out of her nose with some tweezers. When she removes the ointment from her face, it's redder than a baboon's bottom. She hides in the bathroom out of despair, breaks stuff, and blames Eddie for her sunburn. Eddie wakes up outside the bathroom door the next morning, as he tried to make up with her all night. Lila is still in there, and won't even let him in even though he wants to pee. She wants to be left alone, and requests him to slide the menu under the door so that she can order breakfast. Eddie is getting her breakfast when he runs into Miranda's family again. They slept in and missed their plans for the day. They liked his joke so much that they're adding it to their Christmas presents. They decide to go on a double-decker bus tour to a town called Miraflores for exploration. Miranda quietly signals him to meet her out back. He quickly runs to Tito, with Lila's breakfast still in hand. He bribes Tito to bring Lila food on his behalf, without her knowing that he left. Eddie leaves in Miranda's car with her to explore Cuba. They have a jolly good time, and end up doing shots at a Mexican beach party. Eddie gets a call from Mac, and he can't stop talking about how fun Cabo is. He confides in Mac about how he ditched Lila and is spending time with another girl. He asks Mac about a divorce lawyer, which is a major shock to him. Eddie elaborates that she flipped a switch after marriage, but Mac doesn't think it's a big deal. For him, the key to a happy marriage is to fake it till you make it. He also wonders what this other girl thinks about Eddie being married, when Eddie confesses that he hasn't made this information very clear to her yet. However, he will do it when the time is right. Miranda calls out to him, because she has found sea lions in the ocean. So he runs away with her and hangs up on Mac. Eddie parks the car back at the resort as he and Miranda finish singing a song together. They plan to meet back on the veranda in 15 minutes. The double-decker bus stops, and the teenage boys point Eddie out to their father. They gossip to him about how Eddie's wife was murdered with an ice pick. Miranda's family is on the same bus, and they overhear all this. Eddie goes up to his room and makes up an elaborate scenario to lie to Lila. He falsely narrates how he ran into a major client and joined him to play golf all day. He keeps spewing imaginary, specific details about his golf buddies, even though Lila doesn't look very convinced. She is upset with him for not calling her, as she was worried about him. He is all dressed up and ready to leave with his alleged dinner with the work guys. He emphasizes how important this opportunity might be for him, so she decides to join him as well. She starts doing her makeup, to be there for her husband at this major dinner. He menacingly throws in the detail that this dinner is on a cruise in the middle of the ocean. Now Lila feels bad that she won't be able to last out there. Eddie is internally jumping in excitement, because Lila walked straight into the trap he set up for her. He promises to take her out for a late dinner after closing out his deal. He also signals that they'll talk about something important, after which Lila recalls how she rejected his sexual advance this morning. Eddie confronts Tito about this misconduct, who apologizes, but also indirectly calls him out for his lousy behavior. Eddie decides to come clean to Miranda about Lila, but she assures him that she knows about his wife, as her family heard about it on the bus. They're both not on the same page, but they don't know it yet. Miranda hugs Eddie, and he appreciates her even more, thinking that she understands his situation. Eddie joins Miranda and her family for dinner. He even makes plans with her, but Martin is still skeptical about Eddie. Eddie wakes up Lila later that evening. She feels guilty for being a horrible wife and ruining their honeymoon. He feels bad when she gives him a touching gift and postpones their talk. The next day, he tries to break the news of their upcoming divorce to her, but she misunderstands it as him agreeing to move to Rotterdam. She is talking to her mom on the phone when Miranda's cousins catch Eddie. They shove up a pepper up his nose for wronging Miranda, and he returns to Lila. As soon as he tells her they're over, his voice is drowned out by the mariachi band, which keeps playing forcefully. He lashes out at them and screams how he wants some peace with his wife. When he sits back down, Lila is quite impressed by his passion. He tries to end things with her again, but she's confused. Miranda walks by, so Eddie goes after her to clear up the misunderstanding. He admits that he's not a widower when Miranda's aunt gets there and tells Miranda the truth. Miranda steps back from Eddie in disbelief and accidentally falls into the ocean. Eddie jumps in after her, while Miranda's family hurries toward them. Lila, Miranda's family, the twins, and the mariachi band all come down to the beach. Miranda separates herself from Eddie as soon as she gets to land. There is a jellyfish stuck to Eddie's back, and Miranda and Lila both try to get it off of him while everyone laughs at the scene. Miranda removes the jellyfish, and Lila takes off her pants to reveal a ghastly sight on her privates to everyone. She pees on him, and when Eddie recovers from all this, he has already lost Miranda. Eddie literally crosses rivers and mountains, and overcomes many obstacles to get to Miranda. He professes his love to her, even though she's married to Cal now. But she turns him down, and he loses all hope of getting her back. Eddie is moving away from California because Lila got his store in the divorce, and his dad's always off in Vegas. Eventually, we see he has settled in Cabo, where he meets Miranda again. They decide to reconcile because she split up with Cal and understands his situation now. So Eddie makes up an excuse to his Mexican wife Consuela that he'll need to ditch their anniversary dinner for a work meeting.